Hi guys, I am Tara,
And I'm Diego.
and we are doing our presentation on Jennifer Coates. Okay, so Jennifer Coates basically began her education teaching English and specializing in English modal auxiliaries. And at the time and even currently, she supported feminism, which aided in the interest in gender and language that she ended up taking on after she had finished teaching English. Somebody had asked her if she wanted to lead a discussion in language and gender, and she agreed to do it. And it was basically after that she had begun her studies in language and gender and women and men in particular. So by 1979, she had realized that language and gender books are pretty scarce for the most part, and especially books about women and how they use gender were almost non-existent, and so this prompted her to participate in her first bouts of research in her writings. So currently she is working in both English and linguistics as a professor at the University of Roehampton, and then most recently she has become interested in queer linguistics, which she found was an aid for her studies in women and gender language. So with her books and her framework, her main research interest was the construction of gender through language, talk, sexuality, conversational narrative, and turn-taking patterns in conversation. So in order to do this, she had adopted the difference approach. And basically this approach recognizes the differences in cross-cultural communication as their own separate entities, and not in comparison with one or the other. And she found that when you we're comparing the way that people communicated with one another, that we were comparing them in a way as one is going to be better than the other. And that was the main issue that she had, was that a lot of people assumed that because women conversed differently than men in a non-hierarchical way, that everybody just assumed that we were kind of below men talk. So a lot of the research that she does, she was basically arguing that they are not comparable as the same thing for one to be better than the other. So some of the work that she's done so far is men talk, men, women, and language, women in their speech communities, and language and gender, a reader, and basically in all of them it's kind of it's her compiling all of the research that she's done, as well as other linguists, and not comparing women and men, but kind of deciphering them and putting them in their own separate categories as their own ways to communicate. So one of the main ways that she does her analysis on her research is through discourse. So the variables that she studies during discourse are going to include hedging, speaking in italics, so emphasis on the words like quite or very or so, tag questions, and then turn taking. And she had also done small amounts of discourse in turn taking in the deaf community, and compared them with other groups of women in the hearing community, and found that they were very similar in both communities in the way that they conversed with each other and what we were basically doing for one another in our conversation. The women that she focused on had started in her early works as just ladies from her her reading group, and she wanted to be able to analyze the discourse during informal talk. So then that way she could kind of see authentically what women were doing during their conversation and how they were doing it. The main two components that she had kind of seen that was going on during the discourse was either discussion or storytelling, which they both did two different things for the groups of women. Storytelling was constructed in very particular ways, and then she also noticed that during storytelling that it helped to kind of reconstruct ourselves in the identity that we wanted to give off during the conversation in the group. And then while just having random bouts of discussion, she noticed that it was able to involve all speakers. So, kind of depending on what we were needing to do with the women around us, we would either participate in storytelling or the discussions.
Women, Men, and Language. Jennifer Coates began the research for Women Talk, where she recorded her own speech and her speech with her close friends in casual conversation. These were the Oxton ladies because they lived in Oxton in Birkenhead, which is in the UK. So previous conclusions about women's speech have come to the idea that women's speech is deficient because it is governed by the dominance theory, which states that women in society are subordinate to men, and so therefore their speech reflects their need to assert submissiveness, so that forms associated with women's speech are associated with weakness or unassertiveness, like hedges or tag questions. And the topics of conversation are regarded as trivial or unimportant. Jennifer Coates really wanted to use the difference approach to look at women's speech as in its own right, as opposed to comparing it with men's conversation. And she found that all of these forms and functions that were associated with women's speech as weak and unassertive actually had specific uses in the types of situations that women actually use conversation. So women's speech, she found, had two major functions. First would be storytelling. And the idea behind storytelling is to establish and maintain a constant worldview for the entire group present. And they use this to assert and identify themselves and their relationship to each other and to the rest of the world. Although this is a endeavor where one person is primarily speaking, other women will also interrupt or interject particular phrases, but it's always meant as a cooperative endeavor because the women will help each other decide how to feel about the events that took place. So this is why a lot of the conversations that are associated with women's speech are also associated with everyday actions like food or events of the day-to-day, as opposed to significant stories in their lifetime, because their purpose is not so much to relay information that happened, but to assess the events and construct a worldview around them. The other function that women's speech has is discussion. And the idea behind discussion is to allow everybody to talk about their worldview and to put new ideas on the table. So the priority is to have everybody participating as opposed to one person taking the floor and deciding what is correct for the entire group. So it's not necessarily that everybody's trying to agree on one particular thing, but everybody's just trying to decide on what everybody else thinks and identify each other in relation to each other. This is also cooperative because everyone takes care to make sure that everybody is speaking. So the features that are associated with women's speech and have been associated with weakness and unassertiveness are things like hedges or tag questions, or interruptions in a story, but in a place that does not switch the order of conversation, but just says something that you could not have said in the conversation. But what she found was that in fact these actually carry specific functions for the two things described above. For example, hedges are used to soften the blow of a particularly controversial statement and protect the face of either the speaker or the interlocutor, because in women's speech what's important is not the information being transmitted, but the people conversing with each other and identify themselves around each other. Tag questions are used not as a way to communicate indecisiveness and unassertiveness, but as a way to open up discussion to something that may be a clear and uncontroversial point, but the speaker still wants to make sure that nobody would like to contradict that point. By adding a tag question, somebody is allowed to answer that question, but it is not required. So if there is agreement, it can go unanswered. Interruptions during storytelling are not meant to talk for the sake of talking, but they are in fact a way to support the speaker and to let the speaker know that they are listening, and also to let the speaker know when it is appropriate for everybody to decide what interpretation to give to the events that have taken place. Yeah.
Or button. Yep.
So she has some recent work in queer linguistics, which is developed in the queer theory. The particular branch of linguistics that this is called lavender linguistics, and it basically focuses on the differences in linguistic behavior between different sexualities. So heterosexual people as opposed to homosexual or bisexual people, or etc., or transgender people, or I should just say LGBTQ people. So what she found was that although LGBTQ women use cooperative all-female talk as a way to subvert themselves as not submissive to heteropatriarchy. The functions of women's speech in particular outweighed other aspects of LGBTQ language patterns, which is what she is focusing on in her research. Is that fair? Yeah,
Yep.
Okay. So what she's found is that men's and language and women's language differ in a lot of ways. Broadly, women use language to congregate and receive support from one another, so they use it to build cohesive social structures and identities with each other, whereas men use language to either establish a dominance hierarchy to see who is a definite boss and who is a definite subordinate, or to give and receive functional information. This is probably a lot to do with her finding that women tend to form relationships around talking to each other, whereas men tend to form relationships around doing certain actions together. And these different focuses of their friendships will then shape the way that they talk to each other. This is why the difference approach is better for evaluating these differences, because women's talk and men's talk are developed under different circumstances and have different purposes. So it doesn't make sense to consider them part of the same culture.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Okay.
So we hit our 10 minutes, so it's fine.
Okay.
So I think I might have record. When you hit the pause button, it continues the time that it was left off at.